Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Katie, the Senior Centered Physical Therapist. Today I'm going to show you how to make a fidget blanket. So what's a fidget blanket, you're probably asking? Fidget blankets are particularly for those who have dementia, Alzheimer's, or some kind of cognitive impairment. What this does is it allows for them to have something to kind of distract them, something to do with their hands, some things to touch and feel that help bring them comfort. The best way to think about this is when you're stressed, what do you go to? Do you like to journal? Do you like to watch TV or read or maybe pet your dog? For someone who has dementia, for example, those things might be challenging. The TV can be overwhelming. It's difficult to read and write. And yeah, they might have a dog, but what if they're in the hospital? A fidget blanket is basically a portable comfort. So it's kind of like a placemat, and they can set it on their lap and they can feel soft textures like they're petting their dog at home, or they can play with some beads just to take their minds off things for a little bit. Also, you can customize it so it reminds them of hobbies or jobs or things that they really loved in life, and that way it is portable comfort wherever they go. For this project, we're going to need a few supplies. First, you're going to need a sewing machine. You're going to need some scraps of fabric of different textures and different types of fabric that you can cut into 6 by 6 inch squares, which I've already done before filming this video. Then you're going to need a big piece of felt for the back, and then you're going to need some batting for the middle. Some things I also like to use for the front is I like to use some beads, some buttons. Sometimes I use garland or zippers are another one. If you want to make your sewing easier, you'll probably want some pins. You may want some spray bond as well, which will help with the basting in the back go on the front of the blanket, but this is totally optional as well. You'll definitely want some scissors and your rotary cutter if you want one. Let's get started. The first thing you want to do if you're making a fidget blanket is you want to think about the person you're making the blanket for. Do they have a favorite hobby? What did they do for work? Think about things that are familiar to them that might bring them some comfort when they're using their blanket. If you don't know the person you're working with, let's say you're doing this for a community service project and you're just going to donate these blankets, which is a great idea. You can do that in one of two ways. I would either go simple and pick some fabrics that are just like some plain cotton, and then you can mix in some different textured fabrics that are nice and soft, or you could make themed blankets. Many people have had animals in their life, so you could do a dog theme or a cat theme. Many people have hobbies like gardening, so you could do a gardening blanket. You could do it in different ways so that there's a variety of people that that blanket could be impactful for. So what you want to do is get your supplies. So you want to cut out 9 6 by 6 squares. You can make the blanket bigger if you want, but I prefer the 6 by 6. So I'll show you a little bit of video if you have a rotary cutter like this one, how to get some nice straight squares. To get nice straight squares, you want to fold the fabric in half and then lay the fold down on your straight line. Then you want to make sure there's a straight line on the side and line that up with your other straight line. I'm going to take my ruler, cut across at 6, then I'll move the ruler over and cut down at 6. If you don't have a rotary cutter and you're just using your scissors, I would just make a 6 by 6 template and then trace it and then cut it out using the scissors. That's fine too. It'll probably just take a little bit more time. So what you want to do is you want to have 9 squares, and you want to alternate your squares between some plain fabrics and some textured fabrics, because at the end we're going to decorate the blanket and there's going to be different squares that have things to play with or to lace or to feel. You basically want variety in your blanket to keep it interesting and to keep it so that they can fidget with it for a little bit. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just pick 2 squares and I'm going to sew them together. To do that, I'm going to place the right sides of the fabric together, and you can pin these squares together if you want, but because it's such a small square, I'm just going to hold it and put it in my machine. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can use 5/8 as well. The great thing about this is it does not have to be very precise. If you're used to quilting, this is your dream. So you can make some mistakes and this will still come out just fine. Think of it more as you're making a placemat than a quilt, and it doesn't need to be so exact. I'm just gonna put this in my machine. I don't even have a 1/4 inch presser foot, I just have a regular presser foot on. So I'm just lining my fabric up with the inside of my presser foot here. I'll put that down, and I'll just sew straight down. I like to have some scissors nearby and just cut my extra threads as I go. So I have my first 2 squares sewn together here. This is kind of a soft fabric, this is a plain fabric. So I'm gonna kind of go flannel, like a medium fabric in between here. And I'm gonna put that one next to my blue one. It's totally up to you how creative you wanna get. Just remember you want some variety throughout the whole blanket, so you can make sure that you alternate your textures. I'm just gonna do the same thing, just sew straight down. I have my first 3 squares sewn. So now I'm gonna lay this aside, and I'm gonna make my next 3 rows. So once again, looking at what I made and then doing some alternating patterns. So I obviously cut all my squares beforehand, and I also did some fancy squares. So this is the lace-up square. I made a zipper pocket here that I'm gonna add later. You can be as creative as you want, you can be as simple as you want. Because really what we want to do is just put the base of the fabric together, put the front of the blanket all together, and then we'll get to adding all of the gadgets and the fidgets. So now I'm just going to make 3 rows of 3 squares each. Okay, so I have 1, 2, and 3 rows here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to combine the rows together. So I'm going to take 1 row, and I am going to place the right side of the fabrics together. Once again, if you want to pin it down the side so that it holds together while you sew, that's probably a good idea. I'm just gonna risk it, I'm gonna freehand it. Also, you don't need to feel the need to iron the back and press all the seams in the same direction like you would if you were normally quilting. You of course can. Once again, this is not an exact science. It doesn't need to be perfect sewing. This is a great project, I think, if you're trying to teach someone how to sew. That way they can practice their skills and they can see what the machine is doing, but it's gonna turn out even if it's not exactly aligned. So I'm just gonna sew these 2 rows together. So here we go, we got our top 2 rows sewn together. You can see this is not perfect. That is totally fine and okay. We've got a little bit of variety here, some different textures. We've got the lacing up top. So now I'm gonna look at my last row. It's gonna work out perfectly. So I'm gonna put both fish on the end, and I'm gonna make sure that the orange is lined up with a different color in the middle. I'm gonna put right sides together and just finish it off. Now we have the front of our quilt complete. The next thing I want to do is add a border strip to each side. So just the left and the right side, it doesn't need to be the top and the bottom. And what this does is just makes it a little bit bigger because as we sewed, of course, we took that 1/4 inch on each square, so it shrunk up just a little bit. So I just have these strips. These are about 2.5 wide, and I made mine about 20 inches long, even though the blanket should be about 18, just to be safe. So I'm gonna attach this strip and then I'll just cut off the excess when I'm done. So once again, I'm putting the right side of the fabric down on the right side of the face of my blanket, and I'm just gonna sew that together. So I have these 2 strips of fabric now on this side of the front of my blanket, and I'm just gonna snip off the excess. I'm just gonna use scissors. It doesn't need to be precise. It's one side. Now the base of our blanket is complete, and now it's time to add all of our fun gadgets to it. So here's the finished version of the front part of my quilt here. So you can see all the little gadgets and fidgets I added. Because he's into fish in the ocean, I found buttons that looked like shells. I made my little fidgets that looked like fish. You can see super easy things, but really help to make the blanket personalized. We've got our zipper pocket, some fun beads here. Just all kinds of things you can do to make sure that your blanket is really something that brings a lot of comfort to somebody. Okay, now that the front of our blanket is done, we're gonna need our big piece of felt as well as our batting to help make the back and the center of the blanket. I'm going to cut our big piece of felt first, which is the back of the blanket. In order to do that, I'm just going to lay my felt out on my cutting board, and I'm going to use the front of my blanket as a template here. I like to leave a good amount of edge around the front of my blanket for my backing. That way when I sew it, if my sewing gets a little bit wonky, I'll have some room to play with. So I'm not even gonna really measure. I'm just gonna cut around the outside of my front of my blanket, making sure that I'm leaving myself a decent amount of room all the way around. Oops. If you don't have the rotary cutter, you can of course just trace onto the felt just a bigger square around the outside. Oops. Okay. Now we have the back cut for a blanket, so I'm gonna set that aside for a minute. And then I'm gonna bring in the batting here. The batting I do want to be more exact of a cut because it's gonna be in the middle part and we don't need it to overlap. If your batting's smaller, that's okay. It's gonna end up just fine. It's just kind of the supportive part in the middle. So for the batting, I'm gonna pull out my ruler and get as close to the edge as possible. Once again, I'll still be able to cut after I'm finished. Make sure my fishtail's out of the way. Even if I'm cutting on some of the fabric that's just on the edges, that's okay too. You just don't want to cut like your decorations that you worked hard to make. I always am putting the ruler on the inside here, but it gets a little bit difficult if there's some garland or some doodads that are getting in your way. So make sure you're safe first. So if you need to put it on the outside of the blanket here, that's okay as well. Trim up here my batting. Okay, now that we have our pieces cut, we're gonna make a sandwich basically. So this is where I'm gonna use my basting spray here, and I'm gonna spray the front of my batting. Just give it a really good spray all the way around the edges and then in the middle. Okay, this is just gonna help our fabric stick. So this is the bottom bread of our sandwich, and I'm just gonna lay it down kind of towards the middle so I've got some edges on all sides. I'm just gonna smooth it out. Then I'm gonna put the face of our quilt on the front. And so once again, I like to spray the batting rather than the face of my quilt or the back of my quilt. That's just my personal preference, so I'm just gonna spray it again. And then we're gonna line it up at the top. Kind of pull it down so it's all stretched out. It's okay that there's some gap down here. We can cut that at the end. You just want to make sure your fabric is nice and smoothed out here. If it's not, you can kind of pull it up, do a little tug, and then pull it down. Okay, so now we have our sandwich with our 3 pieces, and I'm just gonna take this back to the sewing machine. Okay, now that we've got our sandwich here all made and ready to go, I'm just gonna put it back on my sewing machine. I'm gonna use that same 1/4 inch seam and I'm just gonna sew all the way around. So there we have it. Now our blanket is complete. All I'm gonna do now is cut around the edges so that the front and the back are matched up. And there you have it. Your fidget blanket is complete. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed making the fidget blanket. If you'd like more information on fidget blankets in general, please visit our website, www.theseniorcenteredpt.com or www.theseniorcenteredot.com. Until next time, I'm Dr. Katie. Have the strength to live life to the fullest. Bye-bye.